What would it take for Saudi Arabia to get involved in this conflict?
Well, there is no definitive answer as to when the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia will enter this fight, or when or what will trigger Saudi Arabia's reaction. Yes, there is. And to enter this fight, because it is, as we can see, a domino effect, it's a sequence of events, we can't really imagine how things will actually unfold. If the Saudis decided to enter these wars with full force, Iran would certainly be the biggest loser, because Saudi Arabia would activate its bilateral defense agreement with Pakistan and mobilize the Arab and Muslim world. We're talking about more than 50 Muslim countries with a single goal, to put Iran in its place. Therefore, the last thing we want is to get into this war, and we want a political solution under any circumstances. There's no doubt that the best outcome would be for Iran to voluntarily give up the three main demands, or central issues, which are the militias, nuclear ambitions, and also ballistic missiles. Is there a way for Americans and Iranians to restore Iran's reputation and meet these three specific demands without declaring a complete surrender? That would certainly be the best possible scenario of all.
You mentioned that a bilateral relationship will be started with Pakistan. Pakistan is a nuclear nation.
Absolutely, yes, that's true. And now we've closed this deal with Pakistan. This is a mutual defense agreement, and that means there is now literally a Pakistani nuclear umbrella over Saudi Arabia. We value Pakistan very much, but that doesn't mean we're going to distance ourselves from our strategic partners like the United States, Europe, and other allies. No, quite the opposite. Saudi Arabia is just diversifying its relationships. Estratégicas. Pakistan has always been, without a doubt, a partner country and a firm ally of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And what happens in Pakistan affects us, and what happens in Saudi Arabia affects the Pakistanis. And I think, as I already mentioned, the last thing Iran should want is for Saudi Arabia to end up getting seriously involved in this war.
Yes, this is a warning to Iran.
Absolutely, I completely agree with that, and I believe that the rational people in Iran, if there are any rational people there, are fully aware and understand that Saudi Arabia should never go to war with Iran, because that would be literally catastrophic and completely devastating for the entire Iranian region.
So if you say that, the interest in dialoguing with Iran now is practically non-existent, and it doesn't seem like Saudi Arabia wants to get involved in this conflict, you simply have to accept that.
Yes. Actually, there's a good saying from the founder of Saudi Arabia in 1920. So we're talking about 100 years ago. He categorically stated that the living never fight against the dead. And what did he really mean by that? It was the idea that the concept of getting into a fight against someone who has nothing left to lose ends up being, in a real situation, something completely counterproductive. So I think the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is trying its best to be as restrained as possible. We know that, to begin with, this is not our war. Actually, it was the United States that started this war. Yes, we respect the United States and we want the best for the United States. And we believe that the national security of the United States is an extension of global security, and that the national prosperity of the United States is an extension of global security, financial prosperity, and so on. So maybe President Trump will end the war soon. We can see that there are actually two major factors that make President Trump hesitate to maintain a long war. One of them is the World Cup, which will take place in 2 months. And the second is the congressional elections, the midterm elections, etc., in November. So maybe the United States is really thinking about suspending the war for now. Maybe there will be a second round after all these big events by the end of the year. But we don't know, and we don't know how the Iranian people will react to all these developments within the country. Because, as I said, half of the population is below the poverty line. And with all this escalation, I think most Iranians will suffer even more. And we feel a deep concern, not only for ourselves, but also for the Iranian people who have gone through so much suffering, held as hostages by the current Iranian regime.
I understand the anger towards Iran, but is there any anger directed at the United States perspective?
In principle, no one can really defend Iran, in the sense that yes, we didn't ask for this war, yes, we lobbied the United States not to start this war. But in the end, Iran is the most destabilizing country in the region and in the world. And that's what we're talking about, Iran, which has been recruiting militias here in the Middle East, in Saudi Arabia, and in the Gulf. It has been on the front line in receiving these destabilizing practices from the Iranian regime, whether in Yemen through the Houthis or through Hezbollah in Lebanon, and also when they supported the Bashar al-Assad regime and all the various other militias in Iraq. So, hasn't the Iranian regime been open in telling its people that they are there to export their revolution? And this is really in their plans, in the constitution. So the idea of the United States going to war against the Iranian regime, to be honest, makes sense. Especially because we're talking about a country that still doesn't have nuclear weapons. So imagine Iran's practices and behavior, and how this will become even more dangerous more than ever if they acquire the nuclear bomb. That's why I would say yes. The Saudis have been reluctant to support the start of this war. But at the same time, it's totally understandable that the Iranian regime hasn't allowed political dialogue to become productive. And Iranians have always prided themselves on using time to their advantage. That's why all the conversations and political discussions that took place between the United States and Iran, whether in Oman, Switzerland, Vienna, and so on, they were not successful. Why weren't they successful? Because we know that the Iranians would always try to kick the can down the road, and they always used time to their advantage. They were just waiting for Trump's term to end so they could go back to their old ways. So
it's impressive how the world changes so quickly. We're starting the third week of this war. How different is this country after 2.5 weeks?
yes, I believe that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has already faced more catastrophic situations in the past, like Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait. Like several other conflicts in the region, so many different types of wars that have happened around our area. And the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, together with its Western allies, suppressed communism in the beginning together, and also fought terrorism together, and worked to stabilize global energy markets together. So the Saudis, all the other GCC countries, when it comes to providing logistics, ports and airports. We know that Saudi Arabia is currently the only GCC country that still keeps its own airports and ports operating.
We see ships leaving the Strait of Hormuz, others heading to the Red Sea. Where are the Houthis?
Yes, the Houthis. I honestly believe that they have started to realize that Iran will not continue to be exactly the same Iran. So, in fact, they started to realize that there was absolutely no political gain for them anymore. With the goal of following and copying Iranian activities and practices in the region, who knows? Maybe it's just wishful thinking. But I believe it's perfectly possible for the Houthis to emerge as a Yemeni group, and not just as a militia supported by Iran. The Houthis don't hold all the cards.
But if they started targeting ships in the Red Sea, this problem would become much more complicated.
Absolutely, for sure. And we can see that the main goal of the Iranian regime is to use all its allies to harm the backbone of the global economy, which is the flow of energy and the flow of trade, etc. Why do they do this? Because they want Westerners, Americans, citizens, not just to leave, but also to feel the heat of it, the cost of this war, so they can pressure the American people and Europeans to pressure their governments to stop this war. This is counterproductive because I don't think it will work that way. Because we can see at this moment that the Iranian regime is proving to itself, to the region, and to the whole world that it is an unpredictable country, one that cannot be trusted in any way.
Ok, Salman, obrigado.